We'll give it another minute before we get started. I know some people did say that they would have to watch it on demand because they had something else going. So
thank you for making sure we had that option.
yes. And everybody should have received an email this morning with the PowerPoint in it and a link to the form to get your CLE credit. So that should be, so if y'all did not get that, please let me know. But that went out this morning and it is noon. So we'll go ahead and get started. So for everybody who doesn't know me, there's my computer go off to tell me it's noon. My name is Andy Cole and I'm the pro bono coordinator at West Tennessee Legal Services. And Savannah, I'll let you introduce yourself and jump on in.
So my name is Savannah Quintero, and I'm the pro bono coordinator with the Tennessee Supreme Court's Access to Justice Commission. And together, Andy and I are excited to be supporting this expungement clinic in Madison County on May 6th. And a lot of the information we're going to provide you with today can be used, generally in your expungement practice, but also we'll be giving some more specific information about how we expect that clinic to run on May 6th. So thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you. This is really important work for folks. So I think when we think about expungement, first of all, I want to just name that this can be life-changing for people. It can help people, move forward with their lives, get education, employment, really, truly life-changing stuff. So I'd be really excited to see all of you engage in this kind of work. So that's first. Second, I think it's important when we talk about expungement to make sure we're thinking about, I call them three buckets of expungement categories, types of expungements that you may encounter. And we divide them into these three buckets because that's the way the statute divides them. So, and as you can see from our lovely PowerPoint, those three buckets are non-conviction cases, diversion cases, and conviction cases. So we need to make sure that's the first question we want to ask when we're looking at a criminal record is what happened to these cases? What kinds of cases are they? And which of these buckets do they fall in? So first, and I think probably the just easiest to tackle are these non-conviction expungements. So your nollies, your dismissals, if someone's found not guilty, those kinds of cases. These cases can come off just as of right. Folks are entitled to expunge these kinds of cases. And kind of the only further analysis I think that these kinds of cases require is whether or not there are court costs owed, because that'll be kind of the only kind of stumbling block that those folks will face when they want to get these kinds of cases expunged. So if you see a dismissal on someone's criminal history, go ahead and go and check and see if there are any court costs owed. If they're not, we'll fill out the expungement order, which we'll show you later in our program. And those will get signed by the DA, the judge, and come off of people's records. The other thing to look out for is when you're looking at criminal histories, you'll have a cluster of charges that stem from one incident. And some of those cases might be convictions, some of those cases might be dismissed or nollied. You can separate those out and do what we call a partial expungement. So you can still dismiss those or expunge those dismissals, those nollies, even if you can't expunge some of the other charges that are kind of in that little cluster of cases that stem from that one incident. So that's called a partial expungement, when we can go ahead and get rid of those non-convictions so folks can, move forward with a record that looks better than it did previously. So we had our first bucket, our non-conviction bucket. Diversions are our second bucket, and they operate largely kind of similarly to our non-conviction bucket in that so long as people did everything that they were supposed to do to comply with the terms of that diversion, these can come off a folks' record. And it looks like we've got a question. I'm going to finish up speaking to diversions, and then I'll take a look at that question. And some of you, may be familiar with these diversions. Essentially, it's a situation in which the court says, we'll stop before we, get to any fact finding, and we will, there's often a list of kind of requirements. You'll maybe go to anger management or some sort of drug treatment. I am so sorry. I'm in a shared space, but thank you for your patience. And so once people kind of check all those boxes and all those requirements of things that they need to do, these cases will be dismissed. So these cases can then kind of operate similarly to our non-conviction bucket in that they can just go ahead and come off once those fees are paid. So we got to make sure that's, when you're looking at analyzing whether or not a diversion can come off, first we got to see, did we meet all of our requirements? Second of all, we need to see, did we pay all of our fees and fines associated with this case? So that is our diversion bucket. And let me take a look at this. The question is, what should we do when the DA takes the position that despite a dismissal, if it's linked to a case where a conviction occurred, they cannot be expunged? So I think the law is clear to me that, these partial expungements are eligible. So if we've got our dismissals that are associated with those convictions, we can do a partial expungement and those can come off. There may be a separate kind of different process. Some counties do have different processes to get those dismissals off. So maybe that's something we can talk further on about what that looks like in Madison County, making sure that those partial expungements come off. So that's our diversion bucket, and I'll let Andy kind of speak more to our conviction expungements.
Before we jump into convictions, is there any other questions on diversions or dismissals? Since they kind of operate very differently than convictions, wanted to address those if that we had them. Give it a couple seconds just to make sure. But if not, then we'll go ahead and jump on into expungements. One of the biggest differences, this is kind of big picture with the conviction expungements, is there is a 2-case limit, not including traffic offenses, even though traffic offenses can be expunged if people really want to go through the process of doing that. But that tends to be a lot more headache than it's actually worth. So in that 2-case limit, it can be 2 misdemeanors or 1 misdemeanor and 1 felony. There is kind of an exception. I don't want to call it an exception, but that's the best word to use later. And then also, if you have any disqualifying charges in that 2-case limit, then none of them are going to be eligible for an expungement. Kind of the presumption is for the list, if it's a misdemeanor, for the most part, they are eligible, except the state has set aside some that aren't. If it's a felony, for the most part, they are not eligible, except for the state has set aside some that are. At the time of filing, this is the biggest difference, in my opinion, between conviction, non-conviction, and diversion, is at the time of filing, there has to be at least 5 years that have elapsed since the completion of the sentence, which that also includes imprisonment, probation, or any of the thing that came along with the sentencing, where with non-convictions and diversions, when that is completed, you can move forward with that process. There are a few felonies, I think specifically drug fraud, that requires a 10-year period instead of the 5-year period, but those don't come up that often. Just like with the others, all of your fines, fees, restitution, anything like that has to be paid. You also have to meet all of your conditions of supervised or unsupervised release. And then once again, there's a clerk's fee that's discretionary. This is the kind of exception to the rule when it comes to convictions. It is considered one conviction if it is contemporaneous, is at the same location, was a single continuous criminal episode, and all the offenses were eligible individually. This sometimes gets into a gray area as to debating if they're, especially if they're a single continuous criminal episode. Same location is a little clearer, but the single continuous episode sometimes creates a bit of a headache to make that decision. Savannah, I don't know if you have anything to add on that. I know if you've seen a few more come in, but yeah, I think that's the biggest gray area when it comes to expungements, is whether certain things were considered a single continuous criminal episode. A lot of times you see this in, I know I've seen it with some of the forgery and fraudulent use of credit cards, debit cards, stuff like that. Sometimes they'll kind of all be rolled together. Sometimes they won't. And additionally, some of the drug charges I see, they usually get caught for one thing and have several things that have been tacked onto it. But like I said, that's the biggest gray area for all of expungements. And then these are the ineligible misdemeanors. This is not the full list. In the PowerPoint that y'all were all sent, there is a link at the bottom to go to the tn.gov that has the full list of ineligible misdemeanors. But these are the ones that at least I see the most often that people ask to get expunged but can't. Assault, domestic assault, violation of a restraining order. On these next few, it's really important to notice the parentheses. So I'll explain that a little more, but fraudulent use of a credit or debit card up to $500 cannot be expunged. Child abuse, there's age guidelines on what can and cannot be expunged. And then there are just a few fun ones that I always like to point out. If you can be charged as a violent felon owning or possessing a vicious dog. So if you represent people in criminal matters and they are convicted of a felony, make sure to tell them that they cannot have a vicious dog. Disorderly conduct at funerals can also not be expunged. So if you go to a funeral, please act right. A few other things that I think typically happen a lot, but people don't end up getting charged with. But if you do see this, they're not expungable. Purchasing alcoholic beverages for a minor and then allowing persons between the ages of 18 and 21 to consume alcohol on your premise. I know a lot of people do those things. They might not get caught, but if they do, those cannot be expunged. And then another one that was way too long to actually put on this slide, but unlawful dispensing of anything related to a precursor of meth. It's about 3 or 4 lines long, the whole thing, but essentially if you were arrested and charged with, I've seen, if you went and bought Sudafed and gave it to somebody else, that can be charged under that. So anything kind of related to the production, helping create meth, even if you weren't involved, those kind of fall into that category as well. And then these are the felonies that are eligible, just like with the ineligible misdemeanors. Didn't put them all on there, but I did put the link to the full list. These are the ones that we see often. Accessory after the fact, theft, forgery. And I know you're probably thinking, didn't you just say that fraudulent use of a credit or debit card isn't expungable? If it's a misdemeanor, so if you only use that credit or debit card for $500, it stays on your record forever. If you spend more than $500 and it becomes a felony, you can get it taken off, which makes absolutely zero sense. But that's just the way the law is written. And as we all know, a lot of things don't make sense. But that's just something to point out, that if your client has stole more than $500, you can get that expunged. But vandalism, evading arrests, but only when there's no risk to bystanders. And then there are several drug charges that are in this, but they are very specific. So what you will want to do on all of those is actually read through the statute or read through the charges and look at the statute to make sure that they do qualify, because there are some specifics, just like earlier, that that one little thing might kick it out and make it not eligible. And then I think Savannah's favorite one of the eligible felonies is selling glue for an unlawful purpose. So you can get that expunged for your record if you sell glue for an unlawful purpose. Does anybody have any questions before I move into the even more confusing part on the eligible felonies or misdemeanor or ineligible misdemeanors? So now, if you happen to see a charge that took place before 1989, ignore everything that I said and go just to this slide because it's completely different. You don't see these as often just because they are older. And I'm not going to read off this full slide for everybody just because you don't see it that often, but it's just important to know that expungements prior to 1989 had their November 1st, 1989 charges had their own different set before it was changed. So if you do see that, go here. It's also on the state's website. If you happen to lose this PowerPoint, you can Google TN expungements and it will pull up the full list of everything, a lot of what we're saying today, and you can actually look at it. All right, so that was kind of big picture expungements. So the next thing that I wanted to kind of move into is, what if you have a client who had a charge when they were 18, they're now 50, and obviously have turned their life around, made a mistake when they were younger, but they're not eligible for an expungement, but they want to, have some of their rights back, some things that they want to be able to do. There are a few different options to go through. One of those, the easiest of those, is a voter rights restoration. So once again, there are a list of offenses that can't get your voter rights restored. You have to complete your sentence, including probation, restitution, all of that. You have to pay court costs, and you have to be current on all your child support obligations. That's an important one for the voter rights restoration. This chart, which it was from the Campaign Legal Center, lists out, it was a great chart, and I was not trying to replicate it because they did such a good job. List out, depending upon when that conviction happened, as to what convictions are and aren't eligible for a voter rights restoration. So if your conviction happened, I'm actually, honestly, I'll be completely honest, not sure what happened before 1981, because that's not listed anywhere. But if it was May 17th, 1981 to June 86, all convictions are eligible. And then as we move forward, less and less things are eligible. Murder, rape, treason, voter fraud. And then July 2006, you have bribery added, misconduct involving a public official, interference with government operation, and not just rape, but any sexual offense. Um, and I will get to that question after this next slide, so I don't forget what I'm talking about. Voter restoration, there's really not that much that you as an attorney has to do, except for kind of screen the client. But there is a form that has to be completed by the person's probation or parole officer, or a lot of times there's a lot of turnover in those positions, so they can't find that person anymore. And the clerk's office can complete that for them. That form, there has to be one completed for every single felony conviction. There is not a limit, and there's not a timeline. And then once your client gets that form, they take that to the election commission's office, give that to the staff, and they complete that process. It does not require a court appearance unless you're asking for a cost waiver. So it is a much simpler process to get your voter rights restored. And a lot of people, they want their voter rights restored. That's one of the most important rights to them. So, that's an easy process. So Lena's question is, if you successfully expunge the felony, are the gun rights restored? And Savannah, I believe that is yes, correct?
So I think the gun rights come with the restoration of the citizenship rights. I think the more full, big picture rights.
Right. So yeah, this is a petition for restoration of citizenship rights. You don't have to qualify for an expungement to qualify for this restoration of rights. It's a completely different process. It does require a court appearance though, and it has to be filed in circuit court. It can be filed in the county where the person lives now or where the conviction was obtained. So if they live in Crockett County now, but they were convicted in Madison County, it can be filed in either case, either place. So this restores most of your rights, but it does not remove your criminal charge from your record. But it does allow you to vote, to hold public office, to serve as a guardian or conservator, as well as a lot of other rights. The biggest difference with this, Lena, I will check. I've read a lot of articles because it doesn't really state it out, and I've read articles that say yes, it does.
That's what I've never
Yeah.
been involved in trying to help restore someone's gun rights either. So that might be something that we want to do a little bit more
Yeah,
looking into.
yeah, no, Alina, I completely agree. I've had several that have come in, and that's been their request, was they wanted to restore their gun rights. So I looked into it. I wasn't able to find too much guidance except for a couple of Nashville attorney blogs, and they stated that if it was not a violent charge, then you could have your gun rights restored through this process.
I also want to go back to Jennifer's question really quick, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, I went back and looked at the statute really quick, and you're going to have trouble getting something expunged because the DA's got to sign off on this order. And I could see, I've never encountered a situation like the one you're describing. In the counties I've worked in, the DA hasn't opposed partial expungements. But in looking at the statute, I can kind of see where maybe that might be something that a DA might object to. And I want to do some more looking at that, and I want to do some more research, and then I'm going to reach out to you about kind of what we think about that. That's just not a situation I've ever encountered. And I don't want to say with confidence that that's, that would, violate the statute. without maybe doing a little bit more looking at that. And I have seen, in some counties, the DA just wants a different process just to make sure that they get to, be fully involved in a case and fully aware of kind of what we're asking to expunge. So let me do some more looking at that, and then I'll get back to you about that, Jennifer. I appreciate you.
Yeah, and Lena, I can send out some of those articles that I found about the gun rights restoration, because there's nothing in the statute really saying yes or no either way on them. And that might, that always makes things really fun when the statute's unclear. And if anybody has ever looked at the expungement statute or all of these reentry statutes, they've been added to and taken away from so many times. And there's a lot of conflicting things or things not addressed in it, which is, that's the reason lawyers exist, but is to fight over those things. But yeah, it's not very fun. But with the restoration of citizenship rights, things that aren't fun is also the prosecutor can object to the petition. So this is fully in discretion of the judge and the prosecutor. The judge does have the final say, but the prosecutor can object to it, which makes these a little more difficult, because it really does depend upon your judge, depend upon who your DA is, who the ADA involved is when it comes to the restoration of citizenship rights. And the same thing goes for the certificate of employability. So this can be filed with the petition for restoration of rights or separately. It does apply to misdemeanors and felonies. Savannah, do you have a sample petition for restoration?
I can find one.
Okay, yeah, I was like, I don't have one on handy, but I'm sure we can get one, and I'll send that out to everybody that signed up for this as well. That's the one thing that doesn't come in as often. I think that's probably because not many people know about it, and a lot of people don't want to deal with it because it's not as cut and dry as the rest of them. There's a lot of people can look at it and make their determination. But with the certificate of employability, does apply to misdemeanors and felonies, not just felonies. Once again, the prosecutor can object. Violent offenses are not eligible for the certificate of employability, but this does give protections to employers and a defense to negligent hiring claim. And then additionally, licensing agencies cannot deny a license solely based upon their criminal history, with the exception of a few different places. But this is one of the things that a lot of people, if they're not eligible for expungements and they are looking to apply for certain jobs, they might be able to get the certificate of employability, which might make an employer a little more likely to hire them. They still don't have to hire them. It's in the discretion of the employer. But it provides the employer a little bit of coverage as well.
And I think with this too, I think this is something that folks aren't asking for just because I don't think many people, like Andy said, know that it exists as a resource. But I think that this is something that if we start to use it, I think it would catch on. And I think it could be something that would be really helpful to employers who want to hire these folks. So if this is something that you guys find any clients that are interested in, I'd love to kind of support that effort, because I think I'd love for this to catch on.
Yeah, and this is something we can also look at getting everybody a form on this as well, a form template for it. That way, y'all don't have to try to recreate the wheel with this, since not that many people are doing it, especially out here. Not that many people are doing it. Then the last thing is driver's license restoration. There's not too much to talk about on this. Once again, there's a link in here. Most of that information can be found on the tn.gov website. It outlines all the required documents, fees. The one thing, once again, on this that might need some attorney's work is the cost waivers, if that is needed. which would have to be signed off by a judge. But most of this is just very administrative as well.
I have to say too, I found the Department of Safety to be really helpful on this. The website is pretty easy to navigate, and it tells you just exactly what you need to do to get your driver's license back. And I think that they've been very helpful in walking through folks that I've encountered that need this service, and just what they need to do, because I think that they recognize that this is a problem for a lot of people. We want to make sure that folks are out there that are driving have licenses.
Yeah.
So I found the Department of Safety to be very, very helpful in this as well.
And that's one reason that I did not put too much information on the slide, because unlike a lot of state websites, that one was actually pretty well laid out and very helpful. So they did it a lot better than I did. So that's why I just included that link for everybody. And then kind of one of the last things, just court costs, cost waivers. This obviously, as y'all have seen, impacts a lot of people's abilities to obtain expungements, especially if the big reason they're wanting an expungement or a certificate of employability or restoration of rights is partially because they have not been able to find, a good job because that's on their record. So they might not have a lot of money to be able to pay off some of those court costs. Judges do have the discretion, once again, to waive or reduce court costs. If there is a large amount of court costs that is owed, the judge might not waive the full amount, but what they might do is get a breakdown of what each of those individual costs were to add them up, and the judge might go in and waive part of them and not all of them. So that's something to keep in mind. We've had a few people that have applied for this clinic that's had very substantial amounts of court costs. And I wouldn't expect any judge to waive that high of an amount, but they might be willing to go in and waive some of those individual costs to lower that amount to a reasonable point for the client to be able to afford.
And I think too, with the cost waivers, there's some room to be creative too. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I've seen some judges who will put folks on a payment plan and say, hey, based on this affidavit of indigency and your income and expenses, I think you put this amount of money per month towards your court costs for a year, and then I'll waive the balance. So you can get kind of creative in what you ask. And as we've talked about, these are a big part of whether or not folks can get their records expunged. So just a little bit of creativity might be helpful, and can get some of these records expunged. So
yeah, and kind of going off of that, a lot of people think that they're not eligible for an expungement at all, which they're not if they don't have all their fees paid. So they don't look into the process of getting the fee waivers. They just think, oh, I can't pay that, so I'm not going to ever be eligible. So, if you're talking to someone and that comes up, definitely, make sure they're aware of the cost waivers, because, that is something that some of the judges are a little more willing to work with on people or with people to get that, especially if it's one that, some of it's going to be a case by case basis, a person by person basis. But, if they've got the ability to pay it and they just haven't, the judge probably isn't going to waive it. But, if you've got someone who's on a fixed income, who's only getting, some type of benefits because of something, there's a little more leeway, and the judges are a little more willing to grant that, or as Savannah said, even do a payment plan or anything. It's like I said, it's really in the judge's discretion. So,
sorry.
No.
I wanted to point out too, we will be able to do some fee waivers, or maybe do some fee waivers. We'll be able to ask for some of these fee waivers for some folks on May 6th. The judge is going to have to look at everybody. Every case is a snowflake. But we're going to be able to ask for some fee waivers for some folks that come through for May 6th.
So I was just going to say, before we kind of move into the program that we're going to use and look through the actual petitions, was there any questions on the actual substantive law of expungements before we move into actually walking through the petitions and kind of how the clinic is going to work?
And while you're typing your questions, I just want to reiterate that it's so important to keep our three buckets separate, our
Yeah,
diversions, our dismissals, and our convictions. We've got our three separate buckets, and we treat them all differently, but I think that's your first step when you're looking at a criminal record, is what happened to these cases.
one of the few things that kind of joins them all together, though, is fees have to be paid.
Yes.
That is the common denominator in all of them. But well, they're not seeing any questions, so we will move into the conviction order form, the non-conviction order form. Savannah, you just let me know when you want me to switch over to this document software.
Absolutely. And this may be a little bit hard to see because it's small, but we're going to get you a bigger version to look at shortly. So this is the kind of standard order form that we have for, and some counties may use a different form, but a lot of counties, stick to this form. Then this is for just our non-conviction bucket, and our diversion bucket. If those diversions qualify, the convictions will go through a separate process, and you won't use this form for a conviction expungement. And Andy, if you want to go ahead and open up the document. So what we've done to kind of make these a little bit more user-friendly and kind of easy to accomplish and fill out, is we created this document form for the non-conviction order. And call it an order. It's a proposed agreed order, and we fill out all of the information about a specific case that we think is expungible, and then all the parties sign off on it: the DA, the judge, and the attorney for the defendant, or the defendant themselves if they're pro se. So what we've kind of created here is a hopefully pretty user-friendly question and answer that will auto-populate the form. I think that something that's important to note with this document software is that when you're looking at a criminal record, and we'll see too, and you may have seen on the form when it was up on the screen, there are going to be 3 lines, and there's 2 sections, and it's got the 3 lines for 3 charges, and then 3 lines for the final charge if that charge changed any over the life of the case. And so you can't put more than 3 charges on one of these forms, and then also you can only put 3 related charges on one of these forms. So if you've got one of those cases where someone has 3 thefts, they were all dismissed, so we're all comfortable with filling out this order for that non-conviction expungement, and we can put all 3 of those thefts on one form. However, if those 3 dismissed theft charges are from 3 separate incidents, we're going to need to use one form for each separate incident, regardless of whether or not there's room for it on the form. So just be wary of that. And when you're going through this document, you'll go through one document process for each of those cases, and it'll populate one form. And there's a little toggle where, if you have charges that can go on one form, you can put it all on one form. And hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully it'll clear as mud, but hopefully it'll make more sense as we go through this document. And hopefully my goal with this software was to kind of streamline, because, we've got to write the defendant's name in 3 separate places. We've got to write, a lot of this information and ask for multiple times on the form. So I'm hopefully this will make it a little bit easier on y'all. You can put the defendant's name in there once and it'll auto-populate everywhere that on the form that requires the defendant's name. So Andy, if you don't mind just rolling through this. And we'll talk more about our clinic model, but you'll have all the information that you need if you decide to participate in the clinic to go through and fill out these forms. We'll make sure you have that information.
Like Savannah said, we'll go through the one for convictions later, but anybody who volunteers for the clinic will get these sent to them so they can help. And we also try to make it to where even if you're not very familiar with expungements or criminal law, we made it to where you ask the client these questions and you fill in the information and it's going to put it in there for you. But I'll walk through and I will be defendant for both of them today.
Perfect. Don't put your social security number in.
And then do you want to talk about the OCA number?
This is something that we'll get that information for you. Some counties, this looks a little bit different, but we'll make sure you have that information so that you can fill out this form correctly.
Madison County. And I'm assuming this is Circuit General Sessions.
Mm-hmm. And then you might not have a circuit and a general sessions. In fact, you probably won't. Docket number, you might, but so don't be afraid to leave some of these blank. If this case just stayed in general sessions, don't worry about, you don't have to fill every blank. You don't have to put in a circuit court docket number if there's not one.
An arresting agency is the Jackson Police Department, correct? Or Madison County Sheriff's Department.
Could be.
Whoever did the arrest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's important too, so that folks can.
We will get that information as well for people, for the people in the clinic. You'll
know which was the arresting agency. And here's where, like I was talking about, so if there's 3 charges that are eligible for non-conviction expungement and they're all part of the same incident, then they can all go on this, well, 3 of them can go on the same form. So this is where you can say, this order is only going to have 2 charges on it, and then the form will kind of auto-populate for you 2 different blanks to fill in those charges.
Cool. So if we pick 3, then a third one will show up down here. Or if you just pick 1, you have 1. Final disposition. And then there's also, I did not do this, Savannah had a little more creativity on hers to put the question marks beside if you have a question. So this would be dismissed, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And also, if you have a question, holler. Yeah. I'd be happy to walk through this form with any or all of you the first time you go through it. So
and we'll continue, and then you'll get the screen to confirm all the information. Continue again.
Then you can download the PDF.
The PDF.
So we should be good to go.
You'll have all this information. If you're participating in the clinic, I recommend to everybody, please download this, save it.
This is a helpful thing to just have on hand.
Yeah, and and once you get this, Savannah, you can go in and pull it, but it's a lot harder. Uh,
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes. So go
so
ahead and download it and save it.
yes, yeah, go ahead and download it as soon as you complete it. It's a little bit easier to do that way. Myself, Savannah, depending on which form you use, can go in, but we would need to know, like, we'd have to look through all of them to pull up the right one. So it's a lot easier. Um, so then you just have the form that's been completed and it's ready to be printed and signed and filed.
And I will say too, if you don't like the document, if it's just not your speed, we do have fillable PDF version of this that you can use if that's easier and that's something you prefer.
Okay.
So we can get you both, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, then I will really quickly, this is the, if there was a conviction, this is the form. It's a little more actually like a pleading, but I will, things are similar again. I'll put the office address.
Again, we've got our separate buckets. This is
Yeah.
our conviction bucket. The first form was our non-conviction and diversion bucket.
So once again, you'll just fill out the information. You'll ask the client this information. And then Savannah was smart and put the question marks. We just put things beside it. Circuit, Madison County, since there are 3 different divisions of circuit court. Circuit didn't really
And
calculate.
I want to say too, with the conviction petitions, that's not so, it just requires some kind of extra analysis. You know, you have to wait 5 years after you finish your sentence, and kind of there's just a little bit more, I guess, legwork and talking to, you know, probation officers and just making sure that you check all of your conviction boxes. Then kind of we can check in the clinic environment. So while we won't focus on conviction expungement in the clinic environment, Andy and the beautiful people at WTLS are working on this and would love to walk through a conviction expungement with you kind of outside the clinic context.
And we'll get into this in a moment. Once again, you complete the process, you'll go through it, you'll hit continue. I think mine, you can download it as a Word document or PDF. I recommend on this one a Word document because it's a little less form. Can everybody see the Word document open?
Yes.
So it creates a cover sheet. I will be going in and fixing some of these little things that didn't work exactly properly before the day of the clinic on this. But it is a pleading. And then that also needs to be fixed. But then there's the order that goes as well that can be submitted and signed. So once again, we try to make it as easy as possible for everyone, regardless of how familiar they were with expungements, to be able to actually work through this and be able to help people for the clinic. So now we're just going to quickly, well, first of all, does anybody have any questions about Documate, how it works, before we actually talk about how the clinic will work in the last few minutes?
Really happy to walk you through the document too, if you've got any questions about that.
And for all of my people who volunteer for clinics, we will be using Documate for a lot of other clinic models moving forward. So wills, powers of attorneys, advanced directives, we have that built out, as well as some other forms that we're working on building out for people, because we understand that not, you're volunteering your time to help people. You're giving up your time that you could get paid by a client. So we want to streamline this process and make it as easy as possible for all of the private attorneys that are taking pro bono work to be able to help people without taking up too much of your time. But yeah, so I guess now we'll talk about our May the 6th clinic model, which is going to incorporate everything that you did learn, but I did want to point out very quickly that for any conviction expungement that will take place on May the 6th, you do not have to actually worry about doing the screening process. You we're looking at all of them. We are going to pull the records. So any conviction has come in, we will screen, and if they're not eligible for a conviction, they will get advice from myself, just explaining to them why they're not eligible, whether it's because they have more than two, whether it's because they're not they're in the ineligible misdemeanors or ineligible felonies, or whether it's because they don't have, or it hasn't been 5 years. So we are screening all of those. So if you get a case on clinic day from WTLS, all you have to do is actually complete the form. You do not have to pull records. You do not have to review. You do not have to do anything else. Because once again, we want to make this as easy, as streamlined, and as less time on volunteers that it can be.
Exactly, precisely. And that, I think, is kind of our name of the game with this May 6th clinic, is just to make this as easy as possible on everybody involved. So to that end, a lot of our clinics, we've kind of used a model now and in the past where we show up on clinic day, and that's when we're filling out all of these non-conviction orders. That may be the first time that a volunteer sees a person's criminal record, and that may be the first time that any analysis goes into a person's criminal record. We're shifting, and this is new and exciting for us, to kind of shift away from that model that kind of focuses resources on clinic day, to a model that I think is going to be more convenient for volunteers who want to help, but maybe they're not free on clinic day. And also just, I think, will help us move more slowly, or move more efficiently on May 6th. So to that end, we are doing the bulk of our preparation, all of our preparation before May 6th. So if I, Savannah Quintero, am walking in for an expungement on May 6th, I will walk in greeted, "Hi, how you doing?" I will have already talked to a lawyer. All I will need to do is pick up my folder that will have the completed expungement orders in there. We'll also have any motions for fee waivers already filled out, and any affidavits of indigency required, they'll already be filled out and in that person's folder. So what I would do, the nice lady at the front gives me my folder, and if I need fee waivers, we're going to direct folks, if we have fee waivers in one of our courts that's participating on clinic day, then those folks will be directed to that court so that they can go ahead and ask for those fee waivers. And again, the motion and the supporting affidavit of indigency will be in their folder. And we'll have some volunteers, attorneys, if you're free on May 6th, that'll be there to ask for those fee waivers. But otherwise, if that person does not need any fee waivers for any of the cases that they want expunged, they will just go straight to the clerk's office and they'll help them file them. So I'm hoping this will be really convenient for folks, that, we can help folks get in and out with minimal waiting. And this will kind of lift the burden of what we kind of need to accomplish on clinic day. So in order to accomplish that, what we'll need to do is get all of that prepared in advance. So what we're asking volunteers to do is to, as folks are coming in and signing up for this clinic, Andy and his wonderful staff at WTLS are pulling those criminal records. They are doing some of that advanced analysis, not advanced analysis, but some of that analysis in advance.
Some of it's advanced, so we have to look into a little bit.
So, and they're kind of screening them folks and talking to folks about, hey, here's what we could do on clinic day. Would you like to have these kinds of services? Here's what we can offer you. If that person, if they're are things that we can help them with on clinic day and they want those services, what we're then going to do is we are going to package that intake, or Andy, be honest about my involvement in that. Andy is packaging those, pulling those criminal records, packaging the intake into a beautiful, manageable little bundle, and we'll distribute those among volunteers. So using the information that you'll receive from WTLS, you will then be able to fill out and we'll get you motions and affidavits of indigency that you can fill out as well if folks need those, but we won't send them if you don't need them. You'll then be able to go through and fill this order out in advance of the clinic day, submit it back to WTLS, and then we'll go from there and make sure that we're all prepared for clinic day. So that's kind of the model that we're working on. And I think this is going to be kind of a more workable model for these types of events, and hopefully it'll just be more efficient and just convenient for folks.
Yeah, one of the big reasons is because, as we know, throughout West Tennessee, not many of the clerk's offices have digitized records, so we actually have to go in and hand pull all of them. So it is very overwhelming for the clerk's office when we have 50, 100 people show up the day of and not be able to, we're all trying to pull records at one time to get people served. It creates a headache for everybody involved, and also requires the client who might have had to take off work or find childcare to have to wait a lot longer that day, which is not good. And it also requires private attorneys to have to sit there and wait a lot longer for some situations to happen. So with this, I will be going over to the clerk's office tomorrow to start pulling records. I plan to have, keyword there being planned to, but I plan to have anybody that signed up for the clinic to volunteer for the clinic. I will have the records pulled and hopefully put together and sent out by Wednesday of next week. The last day to register is next Monday. So I plan to have all of those taken care of by next Wednesday, put together. If you volunteered and you don't get them from me by next Wednesday, you might get them from a paralegal in our office because I will be out of town next Thursday and Friday. But they will all be to people next week. That way it gives you plenty of time. You can call these clients whenever you're able to. That's, I think, one of the biggest shifts with how we are going to be doing this clinic. You can make those phone calls to those clients at your own convenience to collect that information. You don't have to be locked into a certain time because sometimes court takes long and you might not know when you're going to get out, or sometimes emergencies happen. So you can really do this at your own convenience. And all the clients have been told, if you qualify for an expungement, you will get a call back from a private attorney. And then we also, you don't have to, if the client doesn't answer, you can leave a voicemail for them to call back, but the ball's in their court on that. You're not going to get that. You're not going to be expected to beg them to take that next step. And then, once you complete that form, if you're in Jackson or the West Tennessee area, I can come by and you can print them out, sign them, review them. I can come by and pick them up to be filed. If you really want to, you can take them to the courthouse, or you can bring them to our office, but I'll come by and pick them up from people, or somebody in my office will. And then if you're not in our area and are willing to participate, which is the great thing about this clinic model, you don't have to be here. We can utilize people from all across the state, frankly, all across the country if they're a Tennessee barred attorney. So if you're not here, contact me. We'll work out how we're gonna do that, but we've got a plan for that as well. So I think that is everything. We've got a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any questions about anything that you want to ask here? If you want to ask something privately, you've got my contact information. I'll send everybody Savannah's contact information as well. But that's expungements in an hour. So and if you're interested to volunteer, you still have time to sign up. You can visit our website, or I can put that in I'll stop sharing my screen and I will put that in the chat. And we do plan, this one has been fairly successful. We have had several people that have called in for Jackson City Court. We're trying to work out a process to do another clinic over there as well in the future. And we are looking at some other counties to do this in. So if your schedule is just super busy and you're not able to do an expungement clinic right now, I get it. I fully understand. But maybe you want to help in the future. We are planning several other ones of these. Once we see how, oh, I just sent that to that's everybody.
To me.
Yeah. So I just sent that link to everybody to sign up. And like I said, if you can't do this one, but you're interested in helping, definitely reach out. We're planning several more of these as well, because there's a lot of need for these, and most people who need expungements can't afford them, so they have to come through our office. If there's not any questions, thank you all for coming to this. Please sign up for the clinic. If y'all haven't seen, we just announced our Law Day CLE for May the 9th, which is the Monday after this clinic. So definitely join that. We're really excited to hear all about the history of constitutional amendments and the US Constitution. So thank you all for coming, and I will see you all later. And thank you, Savannah, for helping me with this.
Thanks, y'all.